Okay, so we have time for questions.
You described like the improvised planning and then the actual planning, and then do you see like the way we're going is somewhere in between, like this transitory thing that was moving along on the back of the truck? Do you think that that's the way that we're going, like into something that's kind of process oriented and by us, for us, like the final image you show? Do you think that's the way that architecture is then moving?
That's a good question. I think that at the end it is, I mean, I would be guessing as much as probably many people would, but in terms of building generally, in terms of settlements generally, I think that the vast majority involve, I was going to say very little planning, or perhaps I should say relatively little planning. And so I would doubt that this is going to change very greatly in the future. Certainly, I cannot see any signs which suggest that means are going to be there for this to change. However, so one thing which I would say is that architects, talking this time about the profession specifically, can provide, can play a role as planners. As indeed, nothing said that to Ebenezer Howard that it was possible to actually make cities like this and to get them off the ground. Basically, he did it largely of his own initiative. This is one of the most remarkable things about him. But in my mind, certainly, the fundamental activity of the architect is to plan, whatever it is. And so I am a furious believer in planning, because unless I were to believe in this, then I couldn't believe in the profession. So that is my answer. I think in practice probably not a huge amount will change, but it is at the end partly up to the architect to promote the value of planning.
French students who have read also Latour, something like that. So thank you. Two questions. Maybe the first one is I was a little surprised of discovering first the importance for you of the scholar Latour, and then going back to French geographers, Vidal Blanchard, and also with the occasion of linking Latour and Howard. And saying that Latour and Howard, with the question of the relations and the possibility of linking town and country, as if town versus country would be human versus non-human. So I'm not sure if it would be interesting to have an answer concerning this aspect. The other question is what you think, or do you use the text and the reflection of Peter Sloterdijk also, because when you mentioned Descola and Latour, obviously I think of the importance of this philosopher for such reflection.
Well, it's easier for me to answer the last question because I haven't read Sloterdijk, so I cannot answer it. And as for the first, I suppose, I was going to say bringing together, which is I suppose what I did in one lecture, but of Latour on the one hand, and say, so human geographers, and or Latour and Ebenezer Howard. Okay, needless to say, it doesn't have any historical basis. By this I am only saying that we can make, for reasons which I have tried to explain, we can make something like, for instance, Vidal de la Blache or Ebenezer Howard, again relevant and inspiring to architects, and precisely to provide some kind of key to actually open up avenues. That's my reason to bring them here. Now, I see your point about, okay, Latour is humans and non-humans. But I think there is also, okay, Blash or Ebenezer Howard would talk about the city or the country. But, I mean, in the case of Howard, for instance, Howard talks about the country. He doesn't talk about nature. Yeah? So, in other words, nature for Ebenezer Howard is something which is, as Latour might say, is humanized. And likewise with Vidal de la Blache, being a human geographer, studying the region, I mean, Vidal de la Blache is really interested, at the end of the day, in nature insofar as it's humanized. And I think the description I have tried to give, from the scholar about the Ashwar Indians, I think would be done in terms which are by no means, at least in my mind, far removed from, say, the way either Vidal or more likely his pupils like de Mongeon, Blanchard and the others might actually give in their description of the region. Is it at all satisfactory?
I just wanted to go back to your point about the terrain vague being over. And does that mean that the economic model is also over? Because for me, the terrain vague is like a part of the private capital development model, which has failed, where it's not supposed to fail, and offers the only opportunity for, if you like, collective space, or a space that is shared in the collective imagination for some possibility or other. And I'm just wondering, because in your Hortus Conclusus, yeah, that yes, that's a very planned idea, but is it susceptible to the same kind of takeover, if you like, by a private capitalist model, which again denies the possibility of collective space? Because maybe for me that was something in your lecture which you didn't address directly, was the idea of collective space, which, and I agree with you, the terrain vague is not it's not the answer, maybe. I mean, it's not inspiring perhaps for the future, and yes, perhaps it is over, but nevertheless there is a seed of the 99%, if you like, in your terms, which is contained in that idea, and I just wonder.
Well, I suppose it's a thing which bothers me about the terrain vague, which, as I said, in my mind has been very dominant in discussions on the city for several decades, is that it is actually a praise of marginality. And it is something which, for instance, one reads in the terms of the Situationists, in the terms of Derive. And so, it's something which would appeal to marginal behavior. Likewise, there are also places which in the city are geographically marginal. And so as I see it, there is a certain kind of passivity which is associated with this idea of the terrain vague. So basically, the common, the collective space can only be where you find it, but you cannot actually make it yourself actively. That's the bit which bothers me. Even though I completely agree with you that this, because of its marginality, it is something which is peripheral to society, and therefore which tends to involve, not by any means the 99%, but at least a fraction of the 99%, and certainly not the 1%. Now, as for the garden, I don't know where the garden would be in the city and what kind of relationship the garden would have in the city. At the moment, it is more a metaphor in my mind. But what interests me in this metaphor is that right in the idea itself, right at the core of the paradigm, so is from the very beginning the idea of care. That is, the idea of care is the foundation of the garden. Now, you could say that in the terrain vague it is the opposite. It is the existence of an absence of care which is the foundation of the terrain vague, and which, if you extend it, is the foundation to a certain sensibility toward the city. So, in other words, a kind of delight in abandonment, a kind of delight in which you see, for instance, in the film by Wim Wenders or Tarkovsky, some typical places in Berlin and so on. And I personally would welcome a much more activist, a much more, I suppose, caring approach to how we think about the city. So when I look, coming back to Howard, when I look at the diagram of Howard and see that right at the heart of the diagram there is the garden, then I feel very excited, because suddenly one is no longer at the periphery, one is just thrown right in the middle of the city, and also addressing this relationship, I suppose, between humans and nature, or humans and non-humans.
I have one question, which is about the driving forces behind some of your observations. And what I mean by the driving forces is perhaps, on the one hand, the fact that, probably there are two really big driving forces today. One is the explosion in the global population, and the fact that even in the time spans that you were talking over, the Earth has become pretty much packed with people, and it's going to continue. This is some kind of phenomenon that's stopping. And then the other one is the rise, so this kind of population explosion, and then, which is going on for the last, 40 years in earnest, and much longer, slowly. And then the second thing is the political driving forces behind some of these things seem to overcome the ambitions, the capacity, and the knowledge that planning has, or ever had. In other words, there might have been a moment in the trajectory of political processes and global population that planning had, the opportunity to get on top of the situation, but that seems to be, to me anyway, to be somewhat lost. So so if you can imagine these two things, kind of two trajectories that kind of touched and now are kind of parting ways, is your thesis, a possible way of trying to rejoin politics, population, and planning, or is it rejoin to come to a sort of place in which they meet again? And is this the method? Is the bricolage, because there really isn't any alternative? Things are going too fast. We don't have time to figure it out. We can make quick pop-up things all the time that deal with the capacities that we're developing, and that even large spaces and buildings that we made 20 years ago are too small to deal with the kind of flows and pulses that our societies have been generating. So I wondered if you could comment. Maybe what I'm asking you is, do you see this as being durable still and relevant in maybe 5, 10, 15, even 25 years as a postulation?
Let me think. I mean, it's a fascinating thing of being around at the moment. Is, as you say, that things are going so fast. And you know, I'm sure many people, probably on a daily basis, I can say so for myself. I mean, I ask myself whether the speed at which events are happening at the moment, since 2008 in particular, I mean, what kind of social consequences this is going to have, and specifically whether this is going to give rise to social movements. I find it very difficult to think. I mean, it depends, you know, the way courses, I mean, the way, what course things are going to take. But if things, you know, are getting even more difficult than they are at the moment, I find it very difficult to think that there will not be social movement in some way or form, by which I mean organized social movement, not merely, you know, the Occupy and whatever the politicians at the moment are doing very badly. So, I mean, if one look back at history and, you know, at periods of considerable chaos, which have been followed by periods of relative organization and so on, I mean, I see certainly no reason to things that we have seen in the last planet, no reason at all. And so one could imagine, okay, this is the kind of, it's a bad scenario, but one could imagine a situation where things go so bad that organization becomes necessary for survival. We obviously see a situation like this on a, you know, in a much smaller context on a regular basis. I think this happens also in society. I mean, I certainly do not think, I think the idea of the end of planning, the idea of the end of social movements is an idea which has been especially current in the last 20 years. But I certainly wouldn't, I mean, it would be, to me, very unrealistic from a historical point of view to imagine that we have seen the end of political movements, the end of planning. In fact, I think, I don't know, instinctively, okay, this is partly wishful thinking, but instinctively, I think that things might well move the other way. I don't know. But what things might be like in 20 years' time, 25, and whether this will still have any validity, well, I hope you were going to say this yourself. I don't know. I mean, I think what issues are lasting here? I mean, the issues of how cities relate to the region is going to be I think, a very big issue in the next 25 years. I mean, one of the things which is striking me is that the way we have thought about cities in the relatively recent past, let's say in the last 3 decades, is as if cities had no hinterland. I mean, people thought about the city as a big mass, and the relationship with where the food came from and so on seemed totally irrelevant. And nowadays it's changing. Actually, this is changing pretty fast. And that I find is very, very interesting, that suddenly the region as a concept, just like say, people spoke about region at the beginning of the 20th century, is becoming relevant again. I would expect this to be still around, I suppose, in 20 to 25 years. I think that's, you know, other thinkers, other architects, especially the ones whom I have mentioned who are current now, I mean, I wouldn't venture to guess.
Okay. Wrap it up there.